you just want to listen to this and watch this again, in about a week, it'll be uploaded to the onelamb.org, so everybody remember that, as well as any other programming that we have. We'll all have that recorded and uploaded, so you can share it with a friend or re-watch it or just pass it along. So please know, we think, what a better place to explore the mind, body, and spiritual growth in the area of mental wellness than doing it here at a church, right? So today's presenter is Ron Greer, and he is a One Lamb team member. He's been my mentor and many others. He's a United Methodist minister and has been in pastoral counseling for over 30 years here at this church. We are so lucky to have him. He's written 4 books with one more coming out in the fall. So we'll look forward to that as well. Everyone flocks to Ron, and today we're fortunate enough to have him in our One Lamb programming lineup to speak about resiliency, responding to life's deeper challenges, not just to survive them, but to heal from them. So let's give a round of applause and welcome Ron.
Thank you. It is a joy to be with you. Thank you for being here today. Life is filled with blessing, and life periodically has heartaches. With the blessings we celebrate, we rejoice. With the heartaches, it's not quite so clear what we do with those. And that's why we're here today, to focus on resiliency, how we come back from the times of sorrow, how we come back from the times of turmoil, the times of crisis in our lives. I think of the 3rd verse of one of our favorite hymns, Amazing Grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Hear the words. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. There's the crisis. There's the turmoil. There's the heartache. There's the trauma. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. That will be our first focus today, will be the traumas of our lives. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. To arrive back home is to heal, is to be restored, is to be whole, is to be fulfilled again. And grace will lead me home. It's a grace we call resiliency. That will be our second focus. Challenges, struggles, turmoil, it's a part of life. I once read where someone said, if they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I should be able to bench press a Buick by now. Say amen, church. As the saying goes, I resemble that remark. The struggles, the turmoils, the crises, they're on a continuum of severity. Over here, the merely problematic, and over here, the severely traumatic. Somewhere on that continuum, they all reside. Those on this end, we can handle more readily. Now, they're not pleasant, but they don't take us down. Those on this end, these are the ones that are severe. These are the ones we struggle. These are the ones that cause us enormous distress and pain. And these will be our focus today. These are the dangers, toils, and snares. These are the times when we find ourselves in emotional pain, sometimes severe emotional pain. You know what I mean. You've been there. We all have been there. It may be from the suffering of a serious illness. It may be from the heartbreak of a loss. The loss of a loved one, the loss of job, the loss of security. The agony of divorce, the terror of an accident. The heartache of betrayal. The ache of humiliation, the disappointment of failure, the distress of shame, the uprootedness of life transition, the torment of abuse, or the anguish of a dream, a hope, an aspiration that we had, that we lived for, vanished, gone, lost forever. We've all been there. It's a part of living our lives. As Ralph McGill once said, with just a hint of levity, the fleas come with the dog. Adversity, tragedy, dangers, toils, and snares, along with the joys, come with living this life. Each of these experiences of wounding, of being deeply distressed, of suffering trauma, each of these experiences are a part of life itself. Let me pause for just a moment. When have you been there? When have you experienced this in your life? When have you experienced a time of emotional distress? When has your heart been broken? When have you had a time in your life in which you were emotionally wounded? When have you had a time in which you felt absolutely overwhelmed? You didn't know about putting one foot successfully in front of the other. Or a time of distress, or a time of deep worry that caused you to awaken in the night and then lie there in the dark. Do you remember? It didn't take long, did it? No. Those memories come back to us because they are so powerful. Come on in, come on in. We're just home folks here, come on. Here's a chair here and here's a chair here. Right here in the second row. And you remember, as you recall, as you remember those times, then you remember how powerful the emotion was that came with it. Oh, it wasn't just a memory. No, we wish it were. It was a memory with a flood of emotions, sometimes a tidal wave of emotion. Fear, suffering are usually center stage when we experience those traumatic times in our lives. They're often at the center. In most of those times, something important is threatened. Sometimes safety, or a relationship, or security, or a job, or reputation, or well-being, or health, or even life itself. But something of importance in those times of crisis, something of importance is threatened beyond our perceived ability to control it. That's key. Control. Out of control. 3 of life's most dreaded words. Out of control. Out of our ability to be in charge. Being out of control when something important is at stake is one lousy feeling. Now, many of these moments are traumatic moments. I use the word trauma not in the way that it's often used. It's often reserved for war or first responders or horrific accidents. I go back to the origin of the word trauma. Trauma simply meant wounded. Trauma is any time I experience a significant wound. When I think of trauma in your life or in my life, I think of it as a heart under distress. When I think of trauma, I think of a deeply disturbing experience and the resulting emotional component, the resulting emotional impact from that trauma. Anytime this level of distress is experienced, the amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, is ignited, releasing adrenaline in that fight, flight, or freeze response. Distress, trauma, sorrow, suffering all trigger the amygdala. And the result of that triggering is fear, anxiety, grief, heartache. Any or all of those is the result. Now, for most of us, when we experience a traumatic event, we experience the event. And when that experience runs its course and is over, we then begin to deal with the emotional aftermath of it. We work through what we need to work through, we get resolution on it, and we return back to where we were before. We return to our normal life. We may know stress, but we find that we are not permanently distressed. We may know turmoil, we may know trauma, but we're not traumatized by it. We return to normal. That's the majority. Then there are some for whom the experience, and it often has to do with one of two things. Either the experience is so profoundly impactful, often life-threatening, or the experience, and this is where I think of the continual abuse of a child. The experience goes on and on and on, and therefore is so ingrained in the child, or via the accident is so profoundly ingrained in that individual that it stays with them, that they are overwhelmed by it, that they can't readily heal from it and move on. They are the ones then for whom intense and immediate therapy is absolutely required. And then there are many who will experience it. It will then literally pass, but the emotions continue, and they work on a part of it, but don't successfully work it all through. And some of it, and this is not an accusation, it's a description, and then some of it, they deny or repress, and it gets plowed underground. And again, many of us resemble that remark. It goes underground, but it does not go away. And these are the experiences that live to surface another day. It's called PTSD, of course. PTSD is documented as far back as 1300 BC. So I think we can safely say it is simply a part of the human condition. It has always been a part of humanity. It's after experiencing an especially traumatic event, especially a series of them. The trauma survivors will often awaken in the middle of the night, months, years later, in a cold sweat. Or perhaps some event during the day is going to parallel that traumatic experience earlier in their life, and suddenly it's going to come flashing over them, and they're going to be wondering why they are responding so profoundly to something that was relatively minor. No, they're not responding to that moment that happened right then. They're responding to that moment that happened back there. And the flood of emotion, it opened the door to the room of emotion in their heart. And the emotion from back there came flooding out. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. By the way, I find it of some interest in that it was not given a name until after the Vietnam War. But as the soldiers were coming back from Vietnam, it was so pronounced that they focused on it, they identified it, and they named it. You cannot fight the battles in the jungles of Vietnam where your life is on the line every day that you wake up and feel everything that you're feeling at the same time. It is absolutely required to repress and deny what you're feeling in order to get the job done for that day. And that is exactly what these courageous soldiers did. And that's why 3 months, 6 months, 2 years after they were back stateside, they, as I said a moment ago, would awaken in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. The emotion was coming back up. The emotion had to be dealt with. The wound was alive and well. The wound was aching in their hearts this whole time. And now they were out of the jungles. They were out of the danger. They had the ability now to let it surface and to deal with it, to address it, and to heal it. Post-traumatic stress disorder. By the way, giving it a name, and I have read and heard this countless times over the years, giving PTSD a name was, for those who struggle with it, was an enormously relieving moment. It identified what they were hurting with. It identified what they were having to deal with. And it gave them a measure of control over it, because it didn't go away, but it gave them a path, and we'll get to that in a few minutes, but it gave them a path to take in which they could take control over the healing of it. But PTSD is a diagnostic disorder from which very few of us suffer. Yet the event that caused, remember we were focusing on our distress, our distressing events in the past, the events that caused that, some of those may not have fully healed. It's not to the level of PTSD. That's a diagnostic disorder. They came up with a new name for it. This is so many of us. PTSI. Post-traumatic stress injury. We don't have a disorder, but we are injured. We are mentally healthy, but we are under distress. And then a trigger will happen, and we realize, I've got more work to do on that. A trigger will happen, and we realize I'm not living with a lot of resiliency right now. I've got to kick that resiliency in. I've got to address the healing of this wound from back there. When this distress is honored, is successfully addressed and worked through, we will then increasingly experience the healing and the restoration and the wholeness of the resiliency, which is precisely why we're here today. But whether we deal with PTSD or PTSI later on, all of us deal, because it comes with life, all of us deal in the here and now with traumatic moments. All of us deal with what we have been through in stressful events. All of us deal with heartaches. All of us deal with traumas. It may be that we have been there, or that we are there, or that we will be there. So what do? How do we engage this? How do we deal with it? How do we respond to life's wounds and traumas? We bring our best. And in bringing our best, we do so with resiliency and even with growth. We begin with an intentional resiliency. Resiliency is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from life's difficulties. In its Latin origin, I tend to go back to the origin of words because, as those in the New Beginnings class know, I think the origin of a word stays with the word no matter how much it's culturally shaped and changed. The origin of the word resiliency means leap back. It is to go back. It is we were in a healthier place in which we were thriving, and to respond, then we go through our crisis, and to be resilient is to leap back, is to go back to that healthy place we were, to return, which of course means to heal. First we leap back, we recover, we heal, and then we move forward. Come on in. There's some places to stand right back here. You won't be in anyone's way. And then, first we go back, we heal, we restore, and then we move forward. The stronger, and we'll get to this in a minute, we move forward, the stronger for having been there. We grow potentially, and this is our aspiration. We grow into someone we have never been before. More on that in a minute. Resiliency is not a DNA gift. This is not something with which we are either born or not born at our origin. It is not a DNA gift. It is not something we either have or we don't have. It is something that we can either learn or not learn. It is available to us all. Resiliency is a return to a healthy, positive place. And that is exactly what Jesus had in mind for all of us. I have come, and I quote, I have come that you might have life and have it in all abundance. Jesus' aspiration for us was a fulfilled, meaningful, purposeful life, which he referred to as living abundantly. That's our aspiration. That's why resilience is important, because life throws us curveballs. Life sends us not just to the mountain peaks, it sends us back to the valleys. Life sends us through crises, and we are to aspire to abundant living, and that requires resiliency to get back. That requires intentionality. That requires a choice to do what needs to be done, and that's what I want us to focus on today. What is involved in that? From my personal experience, from my personal and my professional experience, and from having done a fair amount of research on the topic of resiliency, I want to share with you the markers, the pillars of resiliency, the markers that tend to guide us from distress to living abundantly. First, the big picture. How we best position ourselves for when the crises come. The big picture. It begins with lifestyle, with a healthful lifestyle. The lifestyle that lays the foundation in here, that lays the secure foundation in here for when that tidal wave of events come over us. You know the list. You know the lifestyle list. Those core ways that we live our healthiest lives. Pray and meditate daily. Enjoy those you love. Read what inspires you. Do what gives you energy. Get rest. Be grateful. Live with purpose. Be led by the Spirit. Develop your community. There will be a pop quiz on this later. Are you getting these? I'm not through. Experience all. Eat healthfully, exercise, play, have fun, and be true to who you are. This is what I refer to as the balanced diet of a healthy lifestyle. And if you want to be resilient, if I want to be resilient, I have got to lay that foundation. I have got to honor that balanced diet of a healthy lifestyle, because that is going to put me in a secure place when the junk comes in, when the crisis comes in, when the trauma happens. I have got to be grounded. I have got to be anchored, pardon me, with what a healthy lifestyle is going to bring. Our problem isn't that we don't know this. We all know. It's called, I'm so with it, by the way. You probably had noticed that. Yeah. That dude is with it. I'm so with it. These days it's called self-care. We called it taking care of ourselves, but it's called self-care now. Well, we all know about self-care. You could have written that list just as well as I could have. We know about self-care. That's not our problem. Our problem is we don't do it. So often we don't do it. And that's what's embarrassing about it. We need to love ourselves better. I love what I heard one time. This fellow said, referring to the second great commandment, you'll enjoy this. He said, if most of us loved our neighbor as we loved ourselves, we'd be arrested. Healthy lifestyle, treat ourselves well, love ourselves better. Okay. By the way, one of those things on that list, let me just quickly highlight. Remember I said live with purpose. Purpose consistently on every study of persons with resiliency, purpose always is on that list, to live with purpose. And I've wondered why. There are two things that come immediately to mind. One, and let me just mention this briefly. One of them is that someone with purpose, if they go through a crisis in their life, they're not only they're focusing on how can I deal with this crisis so I can get back to my purpose. I got stuff out there to do, job. I want to intentionally deal with this crisis, to deal with this mental or emotional issue that I'm having to deal with so I can get back to my purpose. The second way I think of the reason that resilient persons tend to uniformly have purpose in their lives is they will discover purpose in the crisis. So often, you've seen it as often as I, so often someone will go through a crisis and then will live the next few chapters of their life in helping others who are going through a similar crisis. Okay. Purpose. Number one, develop a healthful lifestyle. Then, when the challenging moment comes, know that your attitude toward the challenge sets the sails toward healing. Know that your attitude sets your sails toward healing. Resilience begins with an intentional attitude that you're coming back. Very important. Resilience begins with the intentional attitude that you're coming back, that you're going to heal. Whatever blow life may have hit you, you may not be able to dodge having the wound inflicted, but you are fully in charge of how you respond to it. As Robert Louis Stevenson said, life isn't a matter of holding good cards, but playing a poor hand well. This morning we are looking at mental health with a wide-angle lens. We're not focusing on specific mental health issues this morning, as we usually are. This is not about depression or anxiety or addiction or trauma. It's about all of them. It's about focusing on all of them and the attitude that we bring to each of them. The attitude that we bring, no matter what our mental or emotional health issue is, the attitude that we bring is one that we are coming back, that we are intentional about that. Let that be your attitude. Let that voice of resiliency be your approach, whatever your mental health struggle. The best example that I know of this is a lady named Karen Greer. In many ways, but I want to highlight one. It was within a month of Karen and my son Eric dying. And Karen said in a private moment with me, and I quote, "We're going to make it through this. And we're going to have fun, and we're going to enjoy our lives again. Because if we don't, then Eric will not have been the only one who died." Can't quote that one without pausing for just a moment. That is resiliency. That is the attitude we bring to any of life's struggles. Whatever your distress, let your attitude be, "I'm coming back." So many assume quite the opposite. Turmoil, it may be a significant turmoil. I'm not being critical, I'm just being descriptive here. Turmoil may happen to them. Distress may happen in their lives. A trauma may happen in their lives. And they figure the quality of their lives are over. They throw up their hands. They give up. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You may experience disappointment. You may experience heartache, possibly tragedy. If life victimizes you, know that victim is not your identity. It is something that happened to us. It is something we experience. It is not who we are. We can persevere and rebound with resiliency. Always remember, our attitude sets our sails. Resiliency says that we are here not to survive, but to thrive. It begins with attitude. I rarely quote our grandmothers, and that's my bad. But it's like each of our grandmothers told us, and it was profoundly true. The garden you water is the garden you grow. Let me pause for a moment. If this whole resiliency thing is starting to sound easy, it's not. It is not easy. It's achievable and it's important, but it's not easy. I know you know of a heartache that I experienced not that long ago. I know you know because you loved me through it. In the months after Karen died, a few weeks after she died, I was walking through our kitchen and I saw a little plaque on the counter that she gave me years and years ago. The plaque reads, "You are my happily ever after." And she was mine. I have read that plaque thousands of times over the years, but this time it stopped me in my tracks. And I looked at that plaque and I read it and I reread it and I wondered, how will I be happy now that my happily ever after is gone? I stood there for the longest time. How will I now be happy? Well, I thought to myself, I'm about to find out. So having decided we will take it on, having decided our attitude is that we're coming back, then next, take it on. With a game plan, with a wise, informed, intentional path back to health. Resiliency begins with the attitude, an intentional attitude that you're coming back, that you're going to heal. And then secondly, with an informed path, a game plan of how you're going to get there. Following any anguish, rarely do we drift, amble, or meander back into a fully healthful life. No, that leaves it to luck, and we want far better odds than that. We want a path, we want a plan. Again, our circumstances may be out of our control, but we are in control of how we respond to them. If it's grief or anxiety or trauma or depression or shame or whatever the struggle, start asking questions. Get curious. Be specific. Want to become very informed about what you're feeling, what you're dealing with, and the best course of action to get the help that you need. What are you experiencing? What are you feeling? Identify it. What was the form of distress with which you're dealing? Having identified that, then, what is your best path to healing? What are the resources you'll need? How will you find them? How will you engage this process? Who will guide you therapeutically? Who will support you emotionally? Where and how will you begin? Be specific and be relentless. Whatever your mental or emotional challenge, engage it intentionally. Engage it in a way that you are determined to find the best course of action in getting the resolution. I faced a real challenge when Karen died. It was so difficult, but I had an advantage. And my advantage is that I knew something about grief and mourning. It was really hard, but I knew the path to take. I knew how to begin. I knew how to mourn. Now, I began that path. I'm still discovering where that path is taking me, but I knew how to begin. That is the advantage I want everyone to have. I want them to do their due diligence. I want them to do their research. I want them to discern what they're struggling with and how best to address it so they can be successful, so they can return resiliently to a life of health and wholeness. Depending on the type of struggle you have, bring in the best resources. If it's severe enough that you need professional help, don't hesitate to get it. We live in 2023. There are therapies, there's medication if needed. For mental and emotional distress, get the help you need and get it early. It can save a lot of time and a lot of agony by giving you the clarity on what to address, the insight on how to address it, and a relationship with whom to address it. If you don't know your best path back to health, engage the resources to find it. Sing pretty, Dave. To address any and every mental and emotional issue or distress. Find your path. Be specific. Develop your strategy. Map out your game plan back to health. So, we have lifestyle, we have attitude, we have game plan, and next, support. Embrace your closest relationships. Embrace your community. Or better put, let them embrace you. I have rarely known of someone fully to heal in isolation. Emotional healing is to happen in community, is to happen in a loving relationship. Don't even think of engaging these struggles, these challenging moments alone. Life is to be lived in relationship. I always remember the way Jesus put it, and I don't think this is emphasized often enough. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am with you. Where 2 or 3, now that doesn't mean we're going to have a prayer meeting. It means we are going to love each other in such a sacred way it's going to be prayerful. Where 2 or 3 are gathered. Where 2 or 3 care about each other. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in compassion with each other. It's a sacred moment. You have just stepped on to holy ground. Slip off your sandals. And that's what 2 or 3 are gathered is about. There is something sacred about being embraced by those who love us and who care about us. There is something profoundly healing about it. Do not be shy. Now, if you don't do this, I'll fuss at you. Okay? Do not be shy about reaching out to your community, to your friends, to those who matter the most. Do not be shy about reaching out and letting them embrace you. Remember, we were talking about the amygdala and all that. The amygdala ignites the rush of adrenaline through the body. The heartbeat increases. All that. We can't relax until we step into the presence of someone who cares and someone who wants to hear our story. The moment I have stepped into the presence of someone who wanted to hear my story, who wanted to hear my heart, I began to heal. Okay? Support. Surround yourself with support. Oh, and there's another kind of support that I want us to remember to engage. I got to check this. Chop, chop. Okay, we're good. We're good. We're good. Having been anchored with the emotional support of those beside you, always remember that you are grounded with the emotional, with the spiritual support of the God who is within you. Barbara Brown Taylor, she always has a way of saying it so beautifully. Barbara Brown Taylor once said, deep distress makes theologians of us all. With deep distress, we begin asking the deep questions. Why? Why, oh God? Why? A few days after Karen and I lost our son, a minister friend came over. Oh my gosh, what a delightful human being. He came over and was talking with us, and we were talking about Eric's death, and he said with just absolute incredible candor, he said, Greer, when I crossed the Jordan, I'm going with questions. And aren't we all? Why is there pain and suffering? Is high on my list. I've given it much thought over the years, and I have made peace with the fact that this side of the Jordan, I won't know. It's above my pay grade, and that's all right. There are plenty of mysteries in this world, and that is simply one of them. As Paul put it in his writing, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. That I will know on the other side. This I know on this side. And my word is this ever at the heart of my resiliency and your resilience, is that God's Spirit of grace and support and direction goes with us every step of the way. I have felt throughout any turbulent waters I have experienced, I have felt that I was grounded by something greater than myself, something supportive and profoundly gracious. I find it very interesting that the secular studies, these are secular studies by clinicians, almost invariably include, for people who are successful at resiliency, they tend to believe in a higher power. They're grounded. I believe that higher power is what we call God. Yes, deep suffering makes theologians of us all. Are you with me, O God? And Jesus' profound response was, absolutely. I am with you. In fact, the last words of the Gospel of Matthew are the final words of the resurrected Jesus, in which Jesus said, and remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age. Throughout our crisis, throughout any and every ordeal in our lives, God is compassionately, empathetically, and lovingly with us. You want a visual on that? Let me give you one. Take a snapshot of Jesus Christ standing in the doorway. He has just arrived, and there are Mary and Martha sobbing in tears at their loss. And Jesus is standing in the doorway, and this is the snapshot. He looks over at them, and tears fill his eyes. Tears are streaming down his cheeks. You think God doesn't love us? There's your picture. In the eyes of Jesus Christ is the message of God's profound love for us in every one of our crises. And finally, after you've done the needed work for healing, look for the growth that lies beyond the heartache. With resiliency, we come back. And how do we come back? We may well come back the stronger for having been there. We talked about PTSD, and then we talked about PTSI. And there's another PT. PTG, post-traumatic growth. Okay. Studies show that after a single severe traumatic event, that within months, 80% of the persons who go through that experience return to normal. They return to the lives they knew before the traumatic event. 80%. 10% are still struggling. They're either overwhelmed with it, they're obsessing, they're ruminating about it, or they're experiencing PTSD. 10% are still struggling, which leaves another 10%. That 10% have grown from the experience. They didn't just return to where they were. They returned and then they grew from where they were. Post-traumatic growth, how do we do it? We reframe the experience. from one in which you survived to one from which you grew. By the way, when I say reframe the experience, let me pause for just a second. I want to highlight something that's coming up. Speaking of reframing, Linda Buchanan is going to be leading a workshop this coming October. I want you to keep an eye out for it. She's entitled the workshop, Change Your Story, Change Your Life. And Linda is going to be leading this workshop, speaking of reframing, on reframing our life narratives that are not working well for us. I think it's going to be an excellent workshop, and I wanted to pause for just a moment to get that word in. Please be on the lookout for it, because I think she's going to do a beautiful job with that. Back to the ranch. How do we grow? We begin by reframing the experience from one in which we survive to one from which we will thrive. We have been broken somehow, in some way, by life's heartaches. But always, always remember, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. You have looked squarely at the challenge. You've given voice to your emotions. You've set your sails and have found your path. You have engaged and are addressing the challenges before you. Now pause. What have you learned? What do you know now that you didn't know before? About your life, about yourself. What are your life lessons? What are your takeaways? I think of please hear this. I think of the ache and pain of life's turmoil as being the tuition we pay for the life lessons we can gain. So for heaven's sakes, show up for class. Don't miss the lessons of these moments. And this is why your best, your finest self is yet to come as you seek all you can gain from the experience. I once read, and I love this quote, mosaics are made from broken pieces, and they are beautiful works of art, and so are we. As they say in my profession, that'll preach. For God can use what God didn't choose. God can use disappointment, heartache, suffering that God would never have wished for us, ultimately for our good. We can come out of the wilderness of whatever trauma having grown with a greater sense of depth and wisdom, with a clearer sense of all that we are, with a confidence in how to take on challenging times, with a better focus on what truly matters, and with a new clarity of the personal strength within, a strength we did not know was there. But in the midst of the challenge, you've been there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. In the midst of the challenge, we had to reach way down and pull up a strength that we had never had to access before. It was the challenge of our life. We pulled up a strength we had never had to access before, and now we know it's there. Now we know more of what we are made, and we will take that into the rest of our lives for every challenge that we face from here on. Someone once said, diamond A diamond is just a piece of carbon that handles stress remarkably well. That's us. That's us. May we each come back from having grown. Catherine McKenna put it well. She said, now every time I witness a strong person, I want to know, what dark did you conquer in your story? For mountains do not rise without earthquakes. Bring your A game. Bring your best to your mental health. Bring your whole self, all of you, with your mind be intentional, with your heart be passionate, with your soul be faithful. She was a single mother living in abject poverty, having no idea how she was going to take care of her daughter and herself. She was barely avoiding homelessness. And then, years later, in 2008, she gave the commencement address at Harvard University. And referring back to this frightening, terrifying time in her life, J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame said, and so, rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I built the rest of my life. And the challenges that are before us. Immediately I thought of the words of the psalmist. For he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. In each of our challenges, as we rebuild our lives, that may be our new, that solid, that rock bottom may be our new foundation, a solid foundation on which we can build with resiliency. It has been a joy to be with you. Thank you, Diane, for having asked me.